Good morning and welcome to another podcast. I am out I brought the kids up to school early. It's the first or the second day of daylight savings time. And so it gets light nice and early. And the sun is just coming up. And I thought instead of rushing on with my day, I would make a podcast. Um, when this is finished, I'm going to go help put in chimney. Because I guess that's what you do on Mondays when people need chimneys put in. It's getting cold, so I'm going to adjust this. So that's what today looks like for me. That's what the beginning of today looks like. After that, I am not sure. I wanted to talk a little more. So we've been talking about marriage and about the marriage promise and some decisions that my wife and I made, 29 years into our marriage. When I realized that I didn't want to coast in, piling up resentments that probably wouldn't derail our marriage, but certainly would weigh it down. And I decided that was suboptimal, and so I didn't decide that unilaterally. We decided that we didn't want that. We wanted to pursue a good marriage, and we wanted to keep on. In theory, we wanted to keep on pursuing a good marriage until the end, and we very much did that. Oh, there goes a deer. I can't get around for you to see it, but the big white flash of a white-tailed deer is kind of fun to see. This is the school forest, and maybe you're a part of the world where a school forest isn't a thing, but the school forest very much was a thing in this part of the world when it used to be that one section of a township was devoted to the school, and it could be used as the school saw fit. And one of the ways was to cut wood for the one-room schoolhouse, and another way was that you could sell the land. You could sell the trees and have income. And so the phenomena of a school forest in northern Minnesota is a very, very real one. And so now they maintain it somewhat. There's some trails on it, and once or twice a year, our classes come out here and walk the school forest trails. And so it's a nice bit of Minnesota culture and public land to use. And so that's where I'm walking. And there's the gleaming. My favorite. I didn't know what the gleaming was for a long time, but it's when the sun isn't quite visible, and now it just is, but where the sun is hitting the tops of the trees, but you are unable to see it. That's the twilight's last gleaming, when the setting sun was out of view, but you could see it shining on the flag. In Scottish, it's the gloamin'. Anyway, that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is how we decided that we purposed to keep improving our marriage until the end, not to hit some plateau that we thought was safe, and then run it out. And I'm so glad. I can't tell you how glad I am that we made the choice when we did. And we finished our marriage working on our marriage. So I wanted to tell you, I've talked about that all different ways, but what I haven't done is I've mentioned this before, but I haven't spent a podcast specifically on one of the most effective things that we developed. And I want to do that now. When you are in a serious conversation with someone, there comes a time when it gets too intense. You can't keep on. And I would say in any relationship, there's varying amounts of conflict. We'll call it conflict. There are varying amounts of conflict that a person can endure. And so let's just say that you have one partner who can stand being in conflict with someone that they love. It's not that they don't like this person, or it's but they can stand being in conflict with them only for a very short amount of time. And here we lose my trail, so we're going to go back. Ooh, there's some chaga that I could come back and harvest. So I'll just give you a panoramic view of exactly what I don't get to see, what the eyes in the back of my head would see. So you have one partner who can stand to be in conflict for 20 minutes before they start to feel danger. Okay, because obviously you could start to feel danger if the conflict goes too long. You'd feel threatened. But one person can stand to be in that sort of conflict for 20 minutes before they start to worry about whether this is the end of the relationship. But imagine that there's another partner who, after 5 minutes of conflict, starts to question the stability of the relationship. Well, that's an absolutely horrible feeling. And so that person needs what I would call a timeout. They need to put the conflict on hold and resume the relationship without that conflict. They need to compartmentalize that conflict and then come back to the conflict at some time when it could be productive. You have to have a mechanism for that. Otherwise, your marriage becomes, I want you to imagine, I'm not a great boxing fan. I've gone and seen live boxing maybe twice. Watched what would he be? He'd be my nephew. I watched my nephew box once. And so, that's it's not a big thing, but I think you can understand it. Maybe you've seen enough of boxing to know how it works. You are in conflict, and then a bell rings, and you go to your corner. And then the bell rings, and you go back at it. Now, I mean, imagine somebody who was in conflict and decided to jump out of the ring and run off. Well, fair enough. What would happen in that case is they would declare the person who had stayed the winner. So he ran away. Okay, but then imagine 3 days later, that opponent jumps out of the alley and punches the guy. And you're like, well, where did that come from? We weren't even fighting now. And then they run off again. And they jump out and punch you. And basically, it's pretty frustrating. It would be. And I will tell you that in a relationship, and I don't think this is strictly men and women by any means. It's by personality. But there are people who feel like they're just always going to get punched out of nowhere. And I think that was probably how my wife felt. That she didn't know when this issue would crop up again. And so I would grant her. In our case, it was usually I was the one who wanted to get to the bottom of this, and I'm the one who could tolerate being in conflict without it making me question the stability of the marriage for a lot longer. I think I can do that. I think I can be in conflict for a long time and not have it, and to track it. Okay, that's self-analysis. I don't need to do that. But the point is that it felt like we were in a boxing match that could resume at any moment. And we decided we didn't like that. But the problem that arose was that my wife would typically be the one to call timeout, and I would graciously give her a timeout. And then the issue would be off, and we would try to go about a healthy relationship. 2 weeks later, there would be another incident that fit the pattern of the incident that we were arguing about. And I would be like, we never finished that argument, and we needed to finish it, and I gave you a timeout, but now it's so important that I'm just going to call time in, because now I've got two things I'm mad at. And then obviously that would be more intense. And so a little bit sooner, she would say, well, you gave me a timeout. I really liked being on timeout. So why don't you give me another timeout? And so I would, I think, graciously give her another timeout until I had another issue. And then we had 3 issues on the table. And what we realized together, I kind of remember when it occurred to us that for timeout to work, the person who calls timeout has to be the one who calls time in. And we realized that we had to make a structure so that the person who called timeout would call time in at the right time. And what's the right time? Well, obviously the right time is when you think there's the best chance of the person listening to you. And so we had experienced that problem earlier in counseling with people who had kids. And they would have an issue. I remember the one. They'd have an issue with their daughter. And then, I'm going to tip this up just a little bit. They would have an issue with their daughter. And then they'd be desperate to fix all of the things that they saw were problematic. So they wanted to fix her attitude towards the home, and they wanted to fix the friends she was hanging out with, and they wanted to fix everything that needed to be addressed with their daughter was on the table. These are all the problems we have. And then we would try to give some direction and some hope, and we were successful enough that they had hope to go on. And we would call back in a couple of weeks, and they would say, well, things are going pretty well now. And then another week later, oh no, everything's falling apart. And what we realized, and what sort of ended their desire to talk with us about their daughter, was that we, of necessity, we got pretty insistent on the fact that you have to address, when things are going well, you have to address your long list of problems. You can't wait until you're at each other's throat to bring up your long list. You have to, in that 2-week lull in between, when things are good, you have to be willing to say, okay, things seem to be a little bit better between us. Let's pick one of these things off my list and try to make a little headway. And they're like, well, but then she'd get mad at us. It's like, well, of course, but that's what's happening anyway. The difference is that if you picked the best time you had, and you picked the most the most promising avenue to address, you might make some headway. And that, to me, seems logical. Okay, so that didn't help in that particular situation. But what it did help my wife and I understand is that the person calling time in gets to pick the best possible time. So instead of, the problem was with what we were doing when we first implemented the timeout, is that the timeout would be, the time in would be called when there were more issues and everyone was mad again. And if the person who called timeout could call time in, if they had some incentive or some agreement to call time in, they could call time in at the moment when it seemed most likely to get somewhere, most useful. And sure, there was a danger of going from being pretty good together to bringing up an argument. It's like, well, I don't want to argue now, things are going well. But it's like, well, you are going to argue again. The question is not whether you're going to argue again. The question is, do you want to argue when there's the best chance of it accomplishing something, or do you want to wait and argue when there's almost no chance of it going well? And the logic of that position convinced us, and I think honestly convinced my wife. I don't think she just gave in because I was insisting on it. She decided that she wanted that. She didn't want us to argue incessantly. She didn't want us to argue at the worst possible time. She decided that she would rather go from pretty much happy to arguing at her time. Okay, so we made a rule, an agreement. But the rule we agreed upon was that if we have 48 hours to call time in, the person who called time out has 48 hours to call time in. And that if she didn't call time in, I would get a pan of biscotti. I love a cup of tea in the morning. And my wife isn't Italian, but her biscotti dipped in tea, it was just incredible. There are those things that she was just so good at. And probably nobody else knows that. But wow. If she were here, I would hope that she called time out and forgot to call time in just so I could have another pan. But for me, if I called time out and I didn't call time in, I would need to give her a luxurious back rub. And to a certain extent, those consequences were, in a sense, irrelevant, because she could have had any night, just about, if there was nothing else going on. Certainly any night that we were free, she could have asked for a back rub, and I would have delighted to give it to her. And probably any time that I reminded her that I really miss having biscotti with my tea, she would have gladly given me, made for me a pan of biscotti. So to a certain extent, the consequences were not onerous by any means, but they were just a marker so that there was an answer to the question, what happens if I don't? And there needs to be that answer. What happens if I don't? If this is a game and there are rules, there has to be an answer. What happens if I don't do that? And we had that answer. And that answer was the panna biscotti or the luxurious back rub. Okay, so that's how it worked. Now, clearly, 48 hours is sometimes not a lot of time. There are 48-hour periods in our life. There are 48-hour periods in our life that man, in 48 hours we hardly have a minute to even talk to each other. But we quickly realized that it was acceptable to call time in just to call time out again. And you might say, well, that's kind of dumb. No, it isn't. It is so worth it, because it tells the person who got the timeout called on them, it tells them that we aren't just ignoring this, hoping it goes away. We're tracking the fact that we need to finish the issue that we brought up somehow, some way. We need to do that. But tonight, we have to go here. Last night, we had to go there. And we are not just giving it up. We are not just saying, oh, well. So there were times when it's like, okay, I need to call time in because we're so busy that I can't bake a pan of biscotti and we don't have time to have this discussion. So here's our timeout. And on my timeout, we did add one thing, and it'll come next. But she would call time in, and then we would review where we were. And then she would say, but I need to call time out again. And I think it works. I think it worked in me. It made me so much more confident that the good relationship that we were enjoying wasn't a facade. That the fact that I was not bringing up these issues that seemed to me really important wasn't because I just had to give them up. They were issues. They were issues that she accepted needed to be addressed. But we weren't going to address them tonight because we had to go here or go there, and we wouldn't have time to spend on it, or we wouldn't have the privacy needed. So it made me feel like the good relationship which we were enjoying wasn't a farce. And I think there are people who when things are going well, I think there's often one of the partners who feels like, well, this is a lie. So yeah, maybe it's nice that we're talking nicely to each other, but this is all fake. That might bother both of them. So the one says, I really like it, but I know it's just a veneer. The other one might say, well, I can make this veneer, but it's not fixing the problem. But just having the time out and even saying, I'm calling time in to call time out is, I think, a really useful tool. Okay, but it leads us into the last tool that we decided we needed to develop. And that was, we would call time in, and we would say, well, what were we arguing about? And we would start the argument over. I want you to imagine, this time I'll go to basketball, which I didn't play, but I've watched. So imagine a timeout in basketball. So the teams are playing, something's not quite going right. The coach decides they need a timeout to regroup, and they set the time back to the full time. They set the clock back to the full period, and they set the points at 0. And it's like, wait. I called a timeout. We were ahead by 10 points, and now none of that matters. We just start the game over again after the timeout. And when my wife and I realized that that's what we were doing, we suddenly recognized something. There were couples who we knew who had a low tolerance for conflict, who had argued the same. So let's just say they were 10 minutes. That's how long they could stand to be in active conflict. So they were 10-minute couples. And they had argued the first 10 minutes of the same argument dozens of times, although I don't think it's exaggerating to say maybe hundreds of times. It'd be like the team playing the first 10, 15 minutes of the game over and over and over. They never got anywhere. And since they never got anywhere, there was no incentive for either of them to not just call timeout as soon as it felt a little bit uncomfortable. So they made it sort of built into a habit of starting an argument and calling timeout. Or more likely, since they didn't have a real timeout, to start an argument and then one of the partners disengages. And maybe you've experienced that. You have a partner who will let you start the argument, and as soon as it gets a little bit heated, disengages and just walks away. Okay, so the timeout fixed that just disengaging, which is a real problem. But it doesn't fix the problem of arguing the same first 10 minutes over and over. So we realized that our timeout system needed one more piece. It needed the person who calls timeout calls time in, and there needs to be a record of what points were made in the argument so that you can pick up where you left off. So how would you get this? This is the practical part. Here's what I want you to do. You could change it, but if you want to make your marriage into an optimizing marriage, I think this is the best tool I could offer you. If you've listened to me and said, I want a marriage where we're optimizing our promise, this is a very good start. Do it, move on from it, use this, don't use it long, use it for a day, use it for a few months, whatever. But if you don't know where to start, this is where I will tell you to start. If you know where to start, go there. Okay, if you know how to optimize without my help, then do that. But if you're like, Jeremy, I love your idea, I don't see how it would possibly work in my marriage, then here's what I want to suggest. You be the one. Don't try to make a deal with your spouse. You take the initiative. Take a piece of paper, maybe a little heavier, maybe some cardstock, and write or print or use a crayon. I don't care how you do it. On one side of the card, write time out. And on the other side of the card, write time in. Now, on the side that says time out, I want you to make a line. Say called by, and then put a line, and put at, and then another line. So time out, called by Mary at 7:45, August 13th. Okay, now on the other side, under the time in, I want you to write what we were arguing about. Maybe that's not very concise, but all right. You can say the argument. You can write what there, and then leave a lot of space. Now take this card and go to, I use the print center at the UPS store, or you could take it to Office Max, or maybe if you work somewhere, and get it laminated. So now you have a laminated card that says timeout, called by, line, at, line. The other side says time in and what we were arguing about, and there's a lot of space. And then on your way home from the UPS store, stop at, well, you could probably buy it at the UPS store, although I think it wouldn't be as cheap, but stop by whatever place you get your office supplies and buy a Sharpie, an erasable, a dry erase, but not the big, thick dry erase, a pointed dry erase. And now go to your spouse. You've already done that much work. And go to your spouse and say, could we try this for a month? One of the important things in your relationship, it is pretty brisk. This is the first morning where I've seen ice on the puddles, not just frost on the trees. So causes the nose to leak a little bit. Okay, but this is one of the things. Anything you do to improve your marriage, make sure that you have a start and a finish. Do not decide that you're going to do this for the rest of your marriage. People have done so many improvement things, and they did it, and it worked, and then they quit. And so instead of seeing it as a success, they saw it as a failure. We said we were always going to pray before we went, and then we stopped. And instead of seeing how much that benefited you, you saw the failure. We tried this and we failed. We tried this and we failed. But if you said, okay, we're going to pray before we leave in the morning for 2 weeks, and you're like, well, that's such a good idea. You should do it for the rest of your marriage. That's fine. Do it for the rest of your marriage 2 weeks at a time. But it's a lot easier to follow through if you know that you have a specific amount of time. So you do it for 2 weeks and then you renew it. And someday it becomes a habit. And so maybe it is part of your marriage for the rest of your marriage. But do you understand that you can do something good and turn it, and it's effective and it's helpful, but you turn it into a failure by committing to do it for the rest of eternity. And a whole bunch of things will come up that will make that impossible. I'm not sure that, to a certain extent, Satan might really engineer those things that would come up. So the minute you say, okay, we're going to start each morning with 5 minutes of prayer together, and then your daughter comes home and says, we're going to have volleyball practice in the morning. And you're like, and then you failed. But if you had 2 weeks, right, then you could say, okay, for the rest of these 2 weeks, I am going to get up at 5:30 so that we can do this, and then we're going to change it. But it's just so many times you fail. So you've done the work. You've made this card. You demonstrated some initiative and creativity. You've invested in the relationship. And now you come and you say, could we try this for the next 2 weeks? And if your partner says, nope, not interested, okay, get a hold of me, uipodcast@proton.me, and maybe we'll think of something else you could try. But, I mean, before you call me, maybe you could at least say, is there something that you really want? I really want this. So is there something that you really want that I could give you in exchange for this? I'm willing to bargain. I'm willing to give you more of what you want in exchange for me getting more of what I want. All right, but let's just say that when your partner sees the investment you've made, they say, and maybe they listen to this podcast, that could be a tool you use. They say, you know what, that actually sounds like a good idea. That doesn't sound like you are trying to catch me and make me the bad guy. It sounds like you're actually trying to work on something that will solve the problem. I'll do it. And then I would say, have a practice argument. You can laugh, and people talk about role playing, And I think anybody who's been in a corporate setting is like, oh, yeah, role playing, the most embarrassing thing you could do. That's really going to help. But I think of it as practice. I'm going to take a pause here. So you practice. You bring up an argument. Go ahead. Argue about whether you squeeze the toothpaste tube from the middle or whether you roll it up from the bottom. And pretend, maybe that's a heated argument for you. But if you've been married for a while, so probably you've come up with some solution. But for this exercise, pretend that you really, really care about squeezing it in the middle. And pretend that your spouse really, really cares about rolling it up. And argue. And then probably laughingly at some point, you're going to say, oh, I can't take it anymore, and call timeout. And then on your card, timeout called by Jeremy at 10:43 on Friday. Okay. Now, 48 hours you've got to oh, you know what? I forgot one more piece. So this is a good time to talk about it on the practice session. Figure out, okay, what is going to be the consequence? What do I get if I don't call time in 48 hours? And that should be on your card. And it needs to be, maybe you'll make a second card after you've tried it for a while, but talk it through. Say, okay, what if I don't call? And I think for this practice session, the person who has made the card, you be the one who take the initiative and you call the timeout. And then you have discussion. Okay, what would you want from me if I didn't call time in? I mean, what's something you'd like? And so maybe it's a pan of biscotti. Maybe it's a luxurious back rub. All right. Maybe it's hanging up a picture. I don't know. Maybe you're somebody who always could every time someone was available to hang up a picture would rearrange the living room. Well, okay, this is your time. Don't make it too big, but make it sort of a comfortable consequence. It's a good time to discuss that. Okay, then sometime in the next 48 hours, you're going to call time in, right? And time in, you're going to go back. But before, when you call timeout, here's what you're going to do. You're going to write on the back of that card, you're going to take the pen, and you're going to write the last 2 points. You're going to try to make the last 2 points that you've made. So now if you can, and remember, the person who's going to be filling in the card is the person who didn't want to call timeout. They probably are going to be the less emotional. And so that's the person who's going to fill it out. So the person who's emotional says, I can't take this anymore, is going to say, I need a timeout. And they're going to write in the time and when they need to call time in. The person who is not so emotional is going to say, okay, I'm going to try to summarize where we were in the argument. We just got to the place where you said, my mom always said I never should have married you. And I said, well, if doing this doesn't make you happy, then why do I even try? Well, okay, that's not technically argument. That's more like veiled attack. But if that's all you got, go for it. But maybe you could be a little bit more useful, and maybe you can say, all right, I was making the point of this, and you were asking the question that. Okay, and you're going to write it down. And then within 48 hours, you're going to call time in, and you're going to try to reconstruct the argument where you were. And or Maybe you're going to test and say, you know what? I'm going to let it go. And I'm going to make you the pan of biscotti. And then while you're eating biscotti, I'm going to call time in. You don't make the pan of biscotti instead of calling time in. You make the pan of biscotti because you were late. And then you have a time in. But anyway, maybe you find out that while they're having biscotti and tea, they suddenly aren't quite so angry anymore. Well, that's a good thing. All right, so you run through this practice session. And then for 2 weeks, you keep the timeout card available. And at the end of 2 weeks, you say, well, did that help us? I think your answer will be yes, it did. Although it might be at the end of 2 weeks that, well, we didn't really have an argument. And it's like, okay, well, that's very good, but probably then institute it for another couple weeks until you found out whether having a solid timeout helps you as much as it helped my wife and I. Because I will tell you, this worked for us. This was a huge part of our decision to stop coasting. I hope you understand what I mean by that. We were to the point where we were going to make it till death do you part. We would probably be irritated, and we'd save up all of these irritations, but we were big enough people and disciplined enough that we weren't going to step out. We weren't going to go find somebody else. We were going to be married and dutifully miserable until death parts. Or maybe we were going to get so we just didn't care, and then we could pretend we were happy. And I mean, that was the attitude we had. And when we decided to change that, this time out was an important first step. So I'll offer it to you. Here's it. If you believe in this, what I'd like you to do is actually do it. Make yourself the card. Go to the store. Get it laminated. Maybe you've never laminated anything before. It's not hard. You just go in and say, can you get this laminated? But I mean, dare to invest. You're not going to, I will tell you this, you are not going to fix your marriage without investment. There's no cost-free way to fix whatever is making you dissatisfied with your marriage. Okay. So invest. Invest in the laminating and a dry erase pen. Come to your partner and say, is there any way that we could try this? And they're like, what are you talking about? And they're like, well, what could I do to incentivize you to listen to this podcast? And so offer them something real, something they like. Would you listen to this podcast? If you'll listen to this podcast, I will do this for you. And if they say, no, that's not enough, well, up it or give up. It's always an option. You don't get credit for giving up early. So, make a couple offers. Would you listen to this podcast? Or else explain it to them in your words. That's good. Or explain it to them over a dessert they really love. Or explain it to them while they're enjoying a Dove dark chocolate bar. You figure this out. And then ask them. And remember, ask to implement it for a short period of time. Not too short, but a manageable period of time. And then try it. And one of the things then, when you finish trying it, you're going to okay, we're going to renew for another 2 weeks. And at some point there, you're going to say, okay, I'm going to make a new card that has our consequences on it. And maybe you're going to decorate it. And maybe you're going to tighten it up, invent it your way. But I will tell you, this is the best gift I could give you for your marriage. I really, really believe that you will find that it works. I don't know that it can work always. If you're intent on making your partner the bad guy and you're trying to use this to make them the bad guy, maybe it won't work. But if you're already to that point, it won't hurt to try it. Try giving your partner an honest way to call time out. And then keep working. The problems you are facing are not going to go away. Do you understand that? And you are never going to have more energy than you have now. You're going to get older. It's happening every day. All right? So putting this aside and saying, "Oh, that's a good idea, but we could do that, or maybe we don't need it yet. Let's fumble our way through a bit longer." You could do that. But I just don't know how to tell you more seriously than this. Want a better relationship. Enough to invest. Enough to try something. Do not calculate whether you can hit cruise control and coast to the end of your marriage. It's too precious. And maybe you won't know that until she's gone or till he's gone. But even your rocky marriage is too precious to say, "Oh, we'll just coast." Well, that's the Bagley School Forest, and I hope you've enjoyed our walk today. And I will wish you, as I always do, happy trails.